Two things. Number one, I wanted to go back and look at what an average month in the Tennessee territory looked like when I was there because I have a lot of information. And secondly, because we were just talking about Adrian Street because he just passed away here a week or two ago. And I mentioned some of the matches we had. I thought, well, I'll look at a month that I was managing Adrian, right? And this was, so it's not June 1987 in Portland. It's January 1983 in the Tennessee territory. But I think because I've got, detailed records, I think it can give you a better look at how the guys traveled and worked and what the situation was in another average territory. At the time, in 1983, Tennessee was doing well. It wasn't a record year, except Memphis was really good that summer, but it was doing well, and it was a little bit bigger than the small territories like Kansas City, Portland, Continental, but it wasn't as big as the Carolinas or the AWA, etc. So it's kind of another look at what was going on. Would you care to jump into this for a moment?
Oh, I'd love to hear this, yes. I'm curious, at some point you should also do the same month for you and Crockett in 87, just to compare two different things happening the same month in the wrestling business as everything was changing, but I'd love to hear this about your time with Adrian. What month did you say it was?
January 1983, and we can do that other thing. If it'll keep us from talking about the current wrestling, I'm all for doing whatever.
Well, there'll be current wrestling talk and questions later, but let's go into this.
Yeah.
This is great stuff.
Okay, but anyway, this, as people might recall, I started really with a full-time schedule as a manager the end of October, first part of November 1982. I had been doing the TV appearances, and then they worked me into the house shows as it evolved. So really, I've only been full-time as a manager for a couple of months, and I've only had like 2 or 3 gimmick matches where me and Jimmy Hart were on opposite sides while the guys we managed wrestled each other, and we got in and rolled around a little bit. So I'm not very experienced, but I say this because this illustrates one of the points I made earlier. For somebody just getting in the business, brand new, not only if you worked a territory, you had a chance to get out in front of people, but you had a chance to be in the locker room every night with all the people that knew more than you did. So they could tell you when you were fucking up, or they could explain to you beforehand what you were supposed to be doing to begin with, or how to do that so that you wouldn't go out and, lay an egg. And in January of 1983, let's start off with January 1st, New Year's Day. We were in Nashville, Tennessee, because most of the guys lived in Nashville, so it was easy. Go down to the sports arena, short trip, and you're home to watch the news. Now, I was not living in Nashville yet, so I'll tell you, I'd spent the following week, the last week of December. Memphis was on a Monday. That's where we did almost a $40,000 house. Lawler and Bockwinkel for the AWA title was the main event, and it was a sellout, right? Then I went to Louisville on Tuesday, Evansville on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, we were off for the 30th and 31st of December. So, no, I'm sorry, 30th, we had to do a Memphis TV taping because we couldn't do it New Year's Day morning. So we did a TV on the 30th, and then I was off New Year's Eve. I stayed with my cousin in Memphis because I didn't have to pay. So then we start January. I've had one day off, right, in the previous fucking week since Christmas. Now we start January 1 in Nashville. And that was, as I said, the New Year's Day show. The house was $10,700. And I made $100 for managing Adrian Street and Apocalypse over against Bill Dundee and Terry Taylor as part of our ongoing TV angle. And by the way, when I mentioned dollar figures, $1 then is $3 now. $100 then is $300 now. It makes sense because I know for a fact a Wendy's triple combo was a little over $4 then. So multiplying everything by 3. So then we come back to Memphis that night, 200 miles. And the next day we're in Memphis in the Coliseum for an afternoon show on Sunday, January 2nd. The previous week, Lawler has disputedly won the AWA title from Bockwinkel. The people went home thinking he was the new champion. They're going to hold it up and have a rematch the following week, but because they couldn't do it on this one, neither Lawler nor Bockwinkel was on the show. So it went from a record house in Memphis at the time of $39,400 down to $11,500 for the main event of me, Adrian, and Linda against Bill Dundee and referee Jerry Calhoun. That was the first record I set in wrestling, the biggest drop in the history of Memphis wrestling. We dropped $28,000.
I blame Calhoun.
I blame Calhoun. Anyway, the next day, Monday, January 3rd, we were at a spot show in Boonville, Mississippi, where again I managed Apocalypse against Terry Taylor and Adrian Street against Bill Dundee. And Boonville was 90 miles from Memphis, but then I had to go back home to Louisville. That was 400 miles overnight. The next day, Louisville, January 4th, I managed Adrian and Apocalypse against Dundee and Taylor. Got $100. A lot of these payoffs are going to be basically, I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but I was making at the time as the junior member of the squad, the greenest, most unimportant person. This week, the first week of January, I made $625. I was making between $75 and $100 a night. Now, as we just mentioned, the inflation calculator, 625 times 3 is $1,875 for this green fucking manager to work every night with a bunch of people that have been in the business for a long fucking time. How is that? Again, a lot of people say, well, fuck, the territories you had to work every night. Yeah, so you could get good at it. And that's the problem. I was getting paid almost to the equivalent of $2,000 a week to be the lowest paid guy in the company and fucking learn. Anyway, Wednesday, January 5th in Evansville, Indiana. That's 140 miles over from Louisville. Same tag team match, made $60 because it was Evansville. And then the next night, we were in Madisonville, Kentucky, which Teeny ran once a month. And it was at the little junior high school gym. But it was only, my God, 45 or 50 miles from Evansville, as I recall, maybe 60. But there was another live event, and the house was $1,200. I got paid $65. Now, the house being $1,200, let's bring this up now. On all these shows I'm going to talk about, the average ticket price was somewhere between $3.50 and $4. So if you just figure if it's a $4,000 house, there were about 1,000 people or a little over there. If it was a $2,000 house, you were probably better than 500. But the tickets were priced for the people at the time so they could go every week, or so the people in Madisonville could afford, kids $3, general admission $4, ringside $5, or whatever. So then after Madisonville on Thursday night, it's a mere 220 miles back to Memphis to stay at my cousin's house, because the next day on Friday, January 7th, we're in Tupelo, Mississippi, which is 110 miles from Memphis, and it's goddamn hell. And that was the worst town in the territory, and it was always a $50 payoff. We've told Tupelo stories before, but just so you know, the relative expenses of things, to drive from after Madisonville to go to Memphis and then on to Tupelo, I spent $10 on food, $12 on gas, and $20 on a motel room. 1983, what a year.
When you went to Louisville, obviously you stayed at home. Did any of the wrestlers, did you ever invite anyone to stay at the house?
Every once in a while. Actually, after I got in the business, no, because most of the time, the guy, until I started living in Nashville and then I wasn't staying so much in Louisville, the guys were going in different directions, because you could make all these towns out of Nashville and your longest trip was a little over 200 miles. You could be home every night. When I first started living in Louisville, that was the northernmost part of the territory. Memphis was a little over 400 miles away. So I was staying at one end or the other until I got a place in Nashville. To answer your question.
Thank you.
But speaking of Memphis, Saturday, January 8th, we come back from Tupelo to Memphis, 100 miles, and the next morning we're at Channel 5 at 10 o'clock to go on the air live at 11 for the 90-minute program. Once the wrestling show is finished, then we hop in the car and we go 200 miles up the road to Nashville to the sports arena, where this was the 3-on-1 handicap. It was Dundee beating me, Adrian Street, and Miss Linda up all three at the same time. Plus, I was still managing Apocalypse and Jesse Barr. So Jesse would have a single match or Apocalypse would have a single match. Then I'd go back out and either manage Adrian or team with Adrian. So I'm working between 1 and 3 times on each of these shows. And in Nashville that night, I stayed in Nashville because we were in Jackson the following day. So I spent $20 on a motel, $14 on gas, and $10 on food. The house was $9,700 and I got paid $150, which would be the equivalent of $450 today on a $30,000 house. And Nashville, by the way, everybody's familiar with the sports arena now because of TNA making it the Asylum and other promotions over the last 20 years doing shows there. But in the pre-TV days, they built that building specifically for wrestling when Nick was still in charge of Nashville. And by the time they opened it up, Nick was about out of business. Jarrett took it over. But the old building in Nashville at the fairgrounds that Nick ran in the glory years, probably as best we can tell, seated between 3,000 and 4,000 people. But it was a big exhibition hall building. The Nashville Sports Arena that we come to know now, originally with no TV set, no entranceway, just the 2 locker rooms with a goddamn toilet. They look like jail cells, concrete block jail cells. A toilet, a sink, and a fucking boiler. Otherwise, the whole building was dedicated to seats for wrestling, and you could put between 2,000 and 2,500 people in there, depending on standing room and who wanted to cooperate and how many fat people you had. And that's not a joke. It was bleachers, not even individual seats, but bleachers. So Nashville, on most Saturday nights when business was hot, would draw around 2,000 or a little bit more at an average price of $4 a head. And I believe I mentioned during the time that I was managing Adrian, that's when they raised the prices $1 across the board. So instead of 4 and 5, I think it became 5 and 6 or whatever. I don't even think there was a kid's ticket then. So they were selling in the good periods 8,000 tickets a fucking month in Nashville, which translates to almost 100,000 tickets a year in a goddamn concrete block building on the fairgrounds, which the rent I don't think was $500 on that building. So anyway, after Nashville on January 8th, we go to Jackson, Tennessee on the 9th, and that house was $14,000, and I managed twice that night and got paid $100. Again, the equivalent of a $42,000 house and a $300 payoff. But then we come back to Memphis, January 10th, Monday night. Remember I said, Brian, the Sunday, January 2nd, was the lowest house, $11,500, I think, in the modern history of Memphis. Right. Well, Lawler and Bockwinkel were back on the card January 10th. And their rematch, plus me, Adrian, and Linda against Bill Dundee and Jerry Calhoun in our rematch, had a lot to do with it, did $32,000, and I got paid $150, or the equivalent of $96,000 and $450 to be on the card. Lawler and Bockwinkel drew it, right? And then I drove all the way back to Louisville, 400 miles that night, and in 400 miles I spent $23 on gas. And in Louisville the next night, same thing, handicap tag team match, plus I managed a tag team match, Jesse Barr and Apocalypse against Bobby Fulton and Dutch Mantell. And the house was down in Louisville. It was only $14,000. Then Same handicap tag team match on Wednesday night, the 12th, in Evansville, which was a 280-mile round trip from Louisville and back over to Louisville, because the 13th, we were in Lexington, Kentucky. That was the monthly show at Rupp Arena. I managed a tag team match and a single match. The house was $24,000. I got $150,000, or again, a $72,000 equivalent and a $450 equivalent. Then we go back on Friday, January 14th to Tupelo, Mississippi, which was 425 miles from Louisville, where I started from, and the house was $3,000, and we made $60, or I made $60. Then 100 miles over to Memphis for TV the next morning, and then back to Nashville that Saturday night, the 15th, and that's where our return 3-against-1 handicap match with Bill Dundee set a record, my first positive record in the wrestling business, $10,758. Because they had just raised the prices, and we got almost all the people in the building that it would hold, because at an average ticket price of $5, we're still over 2,000 people. And then guess what we did on Sunday, January 16th, Brian?
Sunday, I'm not sure. Tupelo?
No, we got a day off.
Oh, wow, really?
The first day off in the month of January that I had from working 2 and 3 times a night came on January 16th. It was Sunday. Most of the time, the only thing that ran on Sunday in the Tennessee territory was Jackson once a month, or Memphis or Louisville if they couldn't get their regular nights. But then the 17th, we were back in Memphis. House was $16,000 at Memphis prices, which they still had, I believe at that point, a $3 general admission. That's somewhere around 5,000 people, was not a very good turnout, but I got paid $125.
Hey, if I could ask you a question, how many of these shows is Jerry Lawler booked on in this period of time, and how many of the shows, if any, does Jerry Jarrett attend?
Jerry Jarrett was in Memphis most of the time. And Jerry Jarrett was always at TV if he was booking, and sometimes at TV if he wasn't.
What about Nashville?
The fuck? He's going to come. Teeny was selling tickets, but no. Jerry didn't want to come down to nothing happened in Nashville. Nashville kind of took care of itself. It wasn't a big house. It was going to be what it was going to be. If he was wrestling, or if there was somebody he needed to talk to, but just as a matter of course to come to Nashville, it wasn't that crucial.
But how many miles away was his home from Nashville?
35.
Okay.
I mean, Hendersonville's up north there, but no, he was making Memphis every Monday. He was in his office every day. He was at TV every Saturday morning. But, you know, he did the schedule as a wrestler for years, where they were doing 3 and 4 shows every Saturday. So it's not like he was slacking off, but he didn't need to be there. It was house show.
No, I didn't mean it as slacking off,
Yeah.
But like, I can't see Vince McMahon Sr. missing the Garden. You say, okay, that's the Garden.
Well, no, that's not the Garden. Memphis
No.
was the Garden.
Of course, but I'm saying, like, if it was Washington, D.C. and Vince McMahon still lived there, would he miss a show, or would he go to the show?
If they had a show in Washington, D.C. in a building like the Fairgrounds in Nashville, I bet you he'd miss it. And Jerry would go to Lexington to Rupp Arena much of the time also, especially when business was good.
What about Lawler?
Okay, Lawler, on these shows, you can bet that Lawler was booked on all the Memphis shows that drew. Probably most of the Louisville shows, probably few of the Evansvilles, and he was usually, unless they just absolutely couldn't arrange it, on the Rupp Arena shows in Lexington. He wouldn't work Nashville. See, here's the thing. When we're in Nashville on Saturday nights, there's another crew in Jonesboro, Arkansas on Saturday nights, and that would generally be Lawler and Jimmy Hart and some of those guys, because they lived in Memphis. And Jonesboro was only 75 miles from Memphis. So there's other shit going on here besides what I'm talking about.
How hard is that to have the biggest star in your promotion not go to, let's say, Nashville, which runs every week, except maybe once a month or whatever it may be, but he's the biggest star on your promotion? Obviously, you localize
Well,
Not
I mean,
localized. You have the shorter version of the show, so you can alter it to focus on whatever the big thing is in Nashville. But that sounds kind of crazy that he wasn't going to Nashville all the time.
not all the time. He was there. And I mean, for the big, if he had a big program going on, but they didn't bring Terry Funk in for Nashville. The economics weren't there. They'd bring Funk in for Monday, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday in Evansville, just because he was already in, especially if there was a Thursday Lexington. Then he's got 4 days. But that's why Terry wasn't on TV a lot in the studio, except when the Coliseum show was on a Sunday and he could stay over from Saturday. You got to fly the guy from Amarillo on Friday, no big money towns on Friday night. Nobody gets paid for TV on Saturday, except when he did the few times he made it, that was an exception. And then Saturday night to go to a town that's going to do 10 grand without Lawler on the card.
Hey, you brought up Terry Funk. Was that January '83 when he was in there on TV?
Yes. The day of the Super Bowl or the day before the Super Bowl. We're about to get there. Anyway, so where were we? 16th was off, 17th Memphis, 18th Louisville, 19th Evansville, the 20th Bardstown, Kentucky, which is literally 30 miles south of Louisville. Louisville ran on Tuesday night, and as a matter of fact, Dundee and referee Thomas Marlin beat me, Adrian, and Linda, and Thomas was the stiffest referee, and even worse, and he knew how to work, but he was just stiff. He was an old-timer. But then they run 30 miles south at the high school in Bardstown on the Thursday night, 2 days later, and did $8,400. At those ticket prices, I remember this one. At those ticket prices, that was almost 2,000 people. Almost as many as were at the Gardens on Tuesday night. They had a great local sponsor at the school, and everybody came out. And Dundee had to work twice because I think Terry Taylor was hurt, but Dundee beat Apocalypse and then came back and worked with Adrian Street. But yeah, a spot show in Bardstown, Kentucky, 30 miles south of Louisville, after Louisville is running weekly to begin with, does almost 2,000 people. So then on Friday, January 21st, my long national nightmare came to an end. I wasn't booked in Tupelo. I got a day off. But I had to go to Memphis that night because I had to do Memphis TV the next morning. And it's a fucking 6-hour drive. So I went to Memphis that night, did TV the next morning, and then the Saturday night town that night, or that week that I was booked in, I think that was the third Saturday, and they had a flea market in Nashville, the third Saturday of the month. They didn't run wrestling because the flea market took the building over. So I was in Marianna, Arkansas. And that was about not even 100 miles from Memphis, probably about 75 miles. And they did $1,747. I got a $50 payoff for managing in 2 matches. $1,747 at those prices, as we've illustrated, was still about 400 fucking people that I got to work in front of to figure out what the fuck I was doing.
Well, you have a real positive attitude. Who in the back was grumbling about being on these shows, if anyone?
In Marianna, Arkansas, everybody but me. But
you saw it that way, though? Like, even in the moment, you saw it that way? Like, this is my learning opportunity. I'm happy to be here?
Well, I wasn't recognizing everything as a learning opportunity as much as I am now. I was still happy to be there. I was like, well, I could be for fucking $25 the ring announcer, or I could not even be here. But instead, I'm at least on the show. And then in hindsight, I've realized how much experience I got in how quick an amount of time, because I'm not going to spoil anything, but basically I had 3 days off in the month of January, but I worked 4 double shots counting the TV day tapings on Saturdays, and was working 1 to 3 times per night, either managing or wrestling, all in the same fucking month. And made almost $3,000. I did $2,800 as the lowest paid guy in the fucking territory, which today would be, no, I'm sorry, I made $2,685. I see it here, which would be today over $8,000.
Were you still doing any photos in January?
Yes. Yes, I would get to Louisville early, set up my background down in the locker room, and shoot all the pose stuff that was going to be, sold on the merchandise tables at both ends of the territory before the matches where I had to get dressed and go out and work. I just couldn't do ringside action stuff anymore.
So were you still getting them developed and picking them up in the middle of all this schedule?
I was basically, what I would do is on Tuesday nights, I'd come back and I would find all the negatives for the orders, and I would get the rolls of film ready to go that I'd shot to be developed for next week. And I'd go to bed about 6 in the morning. My mom would take the stuff into Full Tone Photo Company for me. And while I was in Louisville for the midweek, Louisville Tuesday, Evansville Wednesday, and one of Teeny's spot shows on Thursday, they would work on that. And Friday, before I would leave for Tupelo or Memphis or wherever the fuck at the other end of the territory I was going, I would stop by and pick that stuff up so that I could take it to the guys and deliver it that weekend, which was goddamn hectic also. But I was doing about as well on the pictures almost as I was on the managing. So this is just the managing money. Anyway, real quick, let's finish it up. I got a couple of more. Monday the 24th was Memphis. Again, Bill Dundee and Terry Taylor against Adrian Street and Apocalypse. We're having return matches. We're doing fucking stipulations. The house there was $17,000. Then I went to Louisville, where the house the following night was $17,000. And for Louisville, 17 to 20 grand at that point was very good. And that's because Bockwinkel and Lawler was in the main event. But 17 grand in Louisville at that point was a little over 4,000 people. Then Evansville, the next night, I know definitely that Lawler and Bockwinkel was on top because the house was $7,300, and that was amazing for Evansville. And hey, I'll have you know, go ahead.
Do you know anything about, obviously it's not the NWA champion or anything, but what kind of cut, if any, did Bockwinkel just get paid like any wrestler would, or because he was the AWA champion, did he get a different kind of split?
There was no percentage deal for Bockwinkel or the AWA champion over and above what a guy would normally get, but because Bockwinkel was Nick Bockwinkel, I'm pretty sure that just from knowing what I know about other deals that were done in this area and other areas at the time, Nick would have probably had a promise from Lawler or Jarrett, you will make at least X dollars per show, but if it's really a good house, you're going to get more. And he would know that before he came down. He wouldn't be surprised by his check. Well, maybe he'd still be surprised, but he would expect it. But there was no, let's send 10% to Vern or whatever the case, like for the NWA champion back in the day.
I thought of it more like and this is an extreme example, just a chic thing. Like, okay, I'm the AWA champion. For me to come in there, I need to get, 5% or something.
Well, no, the thing is, I don't know if he'd have wanted to work in Evansville for 5%. He'd have probably, oh, fuck no.
Maybe not Evansville.
But see, but it depended. But it was something like that. It was a deal where we're going to take care of you. Like when we first went to work for Crockett, he said, "What have you been making in Dallas?" We said, "We've been averaging $1,000 a week in Dallas, and that's the absolute least that we can come for, and we'd rather have more." And he said, "I'll promise you'll make at least $1,000 a week," and we always did until we got figured into the programs, started making more. But I was going to mention also on January 26, 1983, I paid $32.31 for a selection of yachting caps from Caulfield's Novelty here in Louisville.
But you don't know how many?
It just says yachting caps. I think I probably got 3 or 4. I don't know. They were probably about $7 a piece.
We got to bring that back.
And then...
That's how we reintroduce you on WWE TV. Heyman's got the bloodline. No one would expect this. All of a sudden, close up on a yacht at sea, and it's Jim Cornette with just a bevy of beauties all around him. I got all the money. I told you all that one day I'd be rich. Now I'm really rich. Mama left me everything. You take it from there.
And guess who's driving the boat?
Who?
Ted Turner.
Ted Turner?
We're coming for you, Vince, after all this time.
Gonna win the America's Cup?
Well, he's successful on the yachting surface or
On
circuit
the
rather.
surface, yes,
On the circuit, I
known
was
as the
trying to
ocean.
say surface.
Yes.
What I was trying to say was on Thursday, January 27th, we went back to Nashville because that was the alternate night when the flea market took over the previous weekend. You got to come back on Thursday. And then went on to Memphis because the following day was a spot show in Brownsville, Tennessee. Brownsville, Tennessee did $5,000. That would have been probably around 1,200 people. And then Memphis TV was Saturday morning, obviously, again, as normal. And then we went back to Nashville because there were 5 Saturdays in January. So they ran Nashville on Thursday, January 27th. It did a $4,900 house on an off night, or a little bit over 1,000 people. And then they came back 2 days later on the regular night, Saturday night, but at the end of the month, and we did $11,231. That was another record with the high prices. And I believe Lawler may have been on that show. But I know that I managed Adrian and Apocalypse against Dundee and Terry Taylor. And I only got a $75 payoff, which indicates that we were not the main event on that card. And then Sunday, January 30th, we go back to Memphis, and that is the day of the Super Bowl you talked about. The previous day's Memphis TV was where Funk had ripped my pants off. Come to think of it, that if Funk was in Nashville that night with Lawler, had to be $11,231. But then we went back to Memphis and did the Coliseum show where it was Lawler, Funk, and Coco Ware against Hart's guys. And against the fucking Super Bowl, it did $23,000 or somewhere close to 6,000 people on a Sunday afternoon. And then we finished up the month on January 31st in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where unfortunately the ghost of Robert Johnson did not remanifest itself, but we did $5,600, which was well over 1,000 people in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And I got a $50 payoff because I guarantee you Lawler was on that one and he got most of it. And that was my month. Again, I was working between 2 and 3 times a night. I had 3 days off, but we did 4 double shots. But I made the equivalent of $8,000 in today's money to be the fucking flunky on the card.
Adrian had been wrestling in England for years. He had come over to the States a little bit before this. Obviously, Los Angeles was dying when he got there.
Yeah.
What did he think of this schedule?
Everybody from the United Kingdom remarks on how big the United States is and how much people rely on driving instead of public transportation, and how Los Angeles, he was used to cities, London, and he'd been to Calgary and he'd been to Mexico City. But when he got down south, when you took Adrian Street to Clarksdale, Mississippi, he got noticed. But also he was like, bloody hell. He was gobsmacked, as they say, at the sights that he saw traveling the back roads of Tennessee and northern Mississippi and southern Arkansas. It was a whole different world. But he fucked with people in a good-natured way. He would do his gimmick, but not to be offensive or to be heelish, to be friendly with waitresses or people working cash registers or, whatever. He would just make little comments, and they're looking at him like he just came in from a spaceship. But it was definitely eye-opening. And I should mention also, Adrian was making more money than I was. I think probably.
Did Linda get a payday too?
Oh, yeah. Linda got paid. She probably didn't get paid as much as I did. She probably was on the guarantee was $50. You couldn't make less than $50 a night if you showed up. She probably got the $50 guarantee. I probably was getting more like 60 or 75 in that time period because I was managing other people and appearing more than once. Adrian got more money yet because he was the wrestler. So he was probably, if I made, what did I say, 625 for one of those weeks, he was close to 1,000,
I guess
which
that was
would be,
my question though, was like, was it a package deal? When Adrian comes in, is it, my wife comes with me, you have to pay her, or my wife comes with me? I mean, how does it work? I mean, that
well, in those days, I mean, if it was an established deal like Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Precious, once they got on television, started working together, that was part of the gimmick. And some guys would say, "Hey, can you book my girl to be in my corner?" Well, no, not just to get your family an extra payoff, but if it's part of the ongoing gimmick that you're working and you're traveling from territory to territory, then the valet would get a secondary payoff or potentially manager money, and the wrestler would get a little bit more, but they both get paid. And when Adrian came in with Linda, eh, he needed a manager because the one thing that he had not done, they didn't do promos in England. He was a great talker and an entertaining guy, but he didn't have the experience that he had in every other facet of wrestling in the ring, promoting his own shows, whatever. He didn't have that in doing 2-minute promos or 30-second pre-tapes or get in and get out. And the only place he had been out of the UK prior to coming to Tennessee was Calgary, which they kind of did, promos obviously, but Mexico, which they really didn't, and Los Angeles, where it was almost dead anyway.
I don't know if I've ever seen footage of Adrian Street with Ed Whalen. I got to search that out.
That could have been interesting. But so the point was, I didn't. Usually the managers got paid less. Remember, that's why Bobby Heenan left Bruiser, because he fucked him on the payoff when they sold out Market Square Arena, and he managed the Sheik against Bruiser, but he was still paying him like Bobby. So that's the point, is that I was making good money for the cachet I had in the industry, but that was kind of on the lower level of what guys were making at that point in time. And guys always bitched about their money, but when you were making the equivalent in today's money of $8,000 a month, or even back then, $2,685 a month, I'm 21 years old, and I've just started this job. What the fuck? How am I going to complain? And I got to work 7 days a week and be in the car 2,000 miles. But most of the time when I'm in the car, it's with somebody else that knows more than I do, telling me about my new job or giving me advice. And then, not to mention the companionship aspect, which that door opened, as well as just the fun of what you were fucking doing, because it was fun, except when you were, getting the shit kicked out of you by the fucking fans.
I don't know if you would have this notated, but considering this period of time and who you were working with, do you remember any specific lessons you would have learned that early in your career in January of '83?
Oh, God. Well, even before that, but I remember specific generalities of how to, if you stayed after you'd fucked the baby face, but you stuck around to glorify and, hot dog amongst the fans, Dundee would say, "Get the fuck out, leave with your heat." I learned that a lot of times guys wanted to stay out there if they'd have fucked the baby face and they won the match, or they fucked him over, whatever. They want to stand there and get their hands up, and they want to yell with the people and let them yell back, and they think they're getting all kinds of heat. He said, no. So when you get mad at somebody and you start yelling at them, if you yell at them and scream at them, call them every name in the goddamn book for 10 minutes, at the end of that, how mad are you still at them? Whereas if somebody does something and makes you so fucking mad, and by the time you can start to go, "You no good motherfucker, he's leaving, he's gone, God damn you, I'll see you next week and I'll tell you what I think about you." It's subtle little things like that, especially the fan base of that time, was conditioned to, that you could work with, and you just little timing things, or being in the right position or the right side of the ring, or, feeding gimmicks in or whatever. I've told you a story about the chain in the cage match, right?
I'm not sure.
I was used to, I'd learned to throw gimmicks in, like pitch the heel a chain or pitch the heel my shoe or whatever when the referee's back is turned. But we're in Nashville one night, and it's the Fabs against, goddamn it, I think it was the Fabs against Adrian and Jesse, maybe. But whoever the fuck it was, it's a cage match. So I'm supposed to throw a chain into the fucking, into my guy, into the heel, right? No, it was the Assassins, Roger Smith and Donnie Bass. I'm supposed to throw a chain into the cage to one of the Assassins where he's going to get it and try to fucking do something with it, but the Fabs are going to duck it and fucking beat him. And Roger told me, make sure, and Donnie both, they were great teachers also. And they used to take bumps with me where they'd just grab me and take me along with them. I didn't know how to take the bump, but it didn't matter. They'd say, just go with me. And off I'd go. He said, make sure you throw the chain all the way over the top of the cage, way up in the air where the fans can see it coming in, right? So they know what you did. Okay. I fucking wind up when he holds his hands out and makes the motion like, give me something. I throw that chain way up over the top of the cage so it's going to fall right in the middle of the ring. And guess where it fell? Right on top of the ring lights. And and
I don't know that story.
At the same time, they both improvised because there was Roger with his hands out trying to catch something, looking up, and he just froze when he saw it. And Kern came because he saw the same thing. Kern came with the flying forearm as the Assassin is looking up over his head and hit him right on the button and fucking boom, 1, 2, 3, and got out of it. That's how quick they improvised. But anyway,
how did he not lose it and laugh? I mean, of all the things to happen, that is just ridiculous as you're waiting for it.
Well, see, the guy with the mask on, he probably was laughing, but we couldn't tell. And Kern was laughing when he covered him, but he had his hair down over his face. But, just that kind of shit, how to be in the right place, how to do what you're supposed to do in the right timing, and looking at the people and don't turn your back on the people. All the things that you learned by going out there every night and trying shit. And either if you did something really stupid, somebody would notice and say, don't do that anymore. Or if you did something good and it got a pop in the match, your guy you were managing or the baby face or whatever, yeah, more of that. And briefly, I managed Tommy Gilbert as the ace of spades. They'd used Tommy so many times. He came back from, God, I think it was Puerto Rico, and they put a mask on him like anybody in Tennessee didn't have Tommy Gilbert's physique and working style ingrained in their brain. But I got to manage him as a heel. And, he'd teach me a few things. And then when he unmasked and we turned on him, I got to wrestle him like on 2 different spot shows. And he would whisper to me, like when it was time to get heat on him, we'd thrown powder in his eyes or whatever. And I'd get in, he'd say, okay, choke me. Now drop the elbow. I dropped the elbow. He said, do another one. Keep it up. Boom, boom, boom. Now look at the people. You're happy. He's calling all this shit. And all I had to do was do it. Anyway.
Nowadays, it seems like there are a lot of people who get into the business. They are around a lot of people their age. How many people in 1983, who was the closest in age to you, and how many people were within a few years of your age, as opposed to a lot of veterans who have been around that you can learn from?
Let me look at some of the people I'm interacting with. Bobby Fulton was my age. And he was at that time, the bottom rung totem pole babyface on the roster. This was before the Fantastics or the Fabulous or the Fantastic Ones or, anything else. But Terry Taylor, this was 1983. Terry Taylor started in the business in 78, 79, and he'd gone to college. So he was 6, 7 years older than me. Mike Boyette, Apocalypse, was, easily almost 40 at that point. Adrian Street was in his early 40s. Bill Dundee was late 30s. Jacques Rougeau Jr. was there. He's 5 or 6 years older than me. Jesse Barr, was close to my age also. He was only like 23, but he was second generation. There's hold on, I'm looking for different names because I mean you're talking Lawler. Lawler was at the time he's still is 12 years older than me. Bockwinkel was in his 40s at that point.
The Assassins.
The Assassins that well they were in a little bit later on that year, but Roger and Donnie were both probably 40 by then. There were young baby faces. Coco Ware is probably 3 or 4 years older than me. He had started in 78. But here's the thing. It wasn't necessarily the age at that point. Riggy Morton was almost ready to turn 30 at that point, but he'd been wrestling in 1983 for like 6 years. Robert Gibson was at that point in 1983, he was 25, but he started wrestling when he was 17 because of Ricky, his older brother. You had a lot of guys that were still fairly young, but they had turned pro as teenagers. So they were more experienced than guys now that you see that are 22 years old and they've been wrestling for a year and a half, but twice a week, maybe. These were guys who, when they were 17, they started working a territory, so they're like me. Instead of managing where they're working multiple times a night, they're working at least once, but maybe there's a battle royal and double shots or whatever. But say they're having 8 matches a week over a 4-year period. By the time they're fucking 22 years old, they've had goddamn couple thousand matches. So it's a different time progression also. And that's another reason also why that the guys knew to make shit mean something. You didn't want to get hit with a chair 12 times. You wanted to get hit with a chair once that looked so good and sounded so good and caused such a reaction that people would go, oh shit, over one chair shot. Because if you did it on Tuesday, you had to do it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday too. Well, 12 chair shots a night adds up. So let's get some mileage. The big bumps, the big finish, whatever. Make everything mean something to the people so they enjoy it and they get into the story you're telling, but you're not killing yourself in 6 months to tell it. That was, those guys could, and I mean, look at the bumps Lawler took. Through the 70s and 80s, downstairs, being run over by cars, off the tops of things, over the top rope, thousands of bumps in the ring. And yes, he was somewhat of a fucking Teflon magician that he'd never had a major surgery and still was a movie stunt man for 30 years. But all the top guys in the territories, they had their specialties. They had the shit they did, and they were confident they could do it. And they built it and made it mean something. And when people saw it, they lost their shit. But it was a work. They weren't really damaging each other's brains. So anyway, that's how you could draw between 20 and 40,000 people in Memphis to the live matches every fucking month by keeping it interesting and making things mean something.
And if you wanted to make more money, it had to mean something and people had to come back. It couldn't just be, I'm going to make this money no matter what. I could do whatever I want. It doesn't matter if no one comes back.
Yeah, because nobody was on a guarantee. Some people, as I said, like with Bockwinkel, Jackie Fargo, I have some paychecks from the Jarrett Welch Wrestling Company. I've mentioned before, Joe LeDuc was a top heel in the summer of 1978, but business was not at record levels then. But I have a check where he made on one typical week, he made about $1,000 in 1978. That would be close to $4,000 today. And I have Jackie Fargo, who if anybody had a guarantee in Tennessee, it would have been him. He was the man, right? Jarrett brought him over for a Memphis show, and the check is for $500. He probably just said, Jackie, I'll give you $500, come over and work. Okay. But if that house had been a sellout, Jackie would have probably been asking for $750. But $500 in 1979 is the equivalent of a couple grand today for him to work one show. Jackie Fargo was not going to come and work Clarksdale, Mississippi. He was past that. So even though there were not guarantees, contracts, certain people had verbal guarantees or minimums, or they were a guy you just knew to take care of and you knew what their tolerance level was. And, there's all the old stories of Bobby Fulton used to tell this. Goddamn, I can't even think now who it was, but the old promoter would pay you in ones because he'd pay everybody in cash and you had to come in after the show and he'd start reeling off the money, right? And you'd have your hand out and he'd be putting those ones in your hand. And whenever he saw you smile, he'd quit. He figured that's when you're happy. So he saved money that way. But other times, like with an Ernie Ladd, you knew ahead of time if you were a promoter, I got to take care of this guy somewhat, or elsewise it's going to be bad on me because he's going to leave me, stick me in the middle of something if I'm not, forthcoming with what he believes he ought to have. So there was all kinds of deals like, but it made it interesting. Complacency is the enemy of creativity and hard work. When you know you're going to get the same amount of money per night, per week, per month, whatever, no matter what you do, whether it's any good or not, whether you even do it or not, or whether you sit in catering, that, it's great for guys' families and financial planning, but it takes the edge off of how great somebody can be when they want to go out and work for it and get over and go on to the next place that's going to be even better and create something. That's where the territory system was motivation when it came to the way you were paid. And I know a lot of the old guys are going to go, well, fuck that. But back then, the guys wanted to get on top. They wanted to be in the main events, not only to make the money, but to be a star. There was easier ways to make money for a lot of people than this business if you sat down and thought about it. But where else are you going to make this kind of money and be a fucking TV star?
Well, Jim, as we wrap this up, because it referenced something earlier, if you don't mind, I have something here, because I had made a copy of this. September 22nd, 1979, a letter from Norm Keitzer to Christine Jarrett. It's to Miss Christine Jarrett from Jarrett Welch Wrestling Company. I won't give the address, but it also has her number and Jerry's number.
Actually, wait a minute. At that 1979, was it the Landings?
It was Princeton Avenue.
Okay, that's her address then. Jerry lived on that side. Eddie Marlin put his goddamn home address in the program one time when he wanted people to write in to ask about a wrestling school or whatever. But he didn't say that it was his, this is where Eddie Marlin lives, but they wouldn't even get a post office box in those days. They'd use their own addresses. There was no Google. You couldn't look anything up. And it was never listed as people's specific addresses, but they used their own. But yeah, she was on Princeton in Nashville.
September 22nd, 1979. Dear Mrs. Jarrett, this is a letter to confirm Pat Malone's telephone order for 1,000 copies of the Wrestling News number 56 to be sent to you in October. Also, I would like to ask you a favor. I haven't received any new photos and stories from Jim Cornette since this spring.
What date is this?
September 22nd.
Oh, shit.
I had told him in July when I paid him for the last bunch he sent me that I would like more. My partner, Jim Melby, also talked with Jim Cornette at the fan convention in Memphis, and everything was fine. He went through his book of photos with Melby, and Melby picked out some we wanted prints to use in the magazine and paid Mr. Cornette for them with Jim's promise that he would send those photo prints to use as soon as he got additional copies made. So far, we have never received the last bunch of photos that Jim Melby paid Jim Cornette for at the convention.
Well, now, to be fair, the convention was the end of July, so we're only 6 weeks have passed. I was busy.
I don't know what has happened, and possibly there was some misunderstanding. If Jim Cornette is still taking pictures at your matches, I would appreciate if you would ask him what the problem is. I know he and Pat Malone do not get along.
What?
So I didn't mention this to Pat. But I want to get along with everyone. And if possible, sometimes to get photos from Jim Cornette as many of his are very good. I'll send you a copy of the first issue of the Rings Wrestling magazine that I do, and you can look it over and see if you'd like to order any copies of it. Thank you, Norman Keitzer.
Okay, let me clarify. He still thought, because, did you ever talk to Norman? Or was he still around when you would have been talking to people?
No.
He was a very, I won't say timid, but he was a very slow-talking, mannerly person. And it was still from 76, early 77, over the deal where he credited Pat Malone for the pictures. And I wrote him and I was like, you gave Pat credit for my pet. Oh, well, he sent him in. Still, he thought, well, they don't get along. No, I always got along with Pat. I wasn't going to say anything sideways to Pat Maloney to cut my fucking head off. The fucking Green Shadow.
And he just said he wouldn't even ask Pat about it. He knew.
Yeah, he didn't want to stir anything up. See, Norman didn't want to get anything stirred up with anybody. Well, you've seen some of the letters where, he got sideways with Vince Sr. or whatever. They didn't want it, blah, blah, blah. But the thing was, that was the 1979 was the WFIA convention in Memphis. And I remember seeing Jim Melby there. And that's when August 79, I started going to, I was about to turn 18, started going to more shows. I was working more at that point for Bill Apter, sending him stuff. The picture table had gotten busy, and I just had a bunch of shit going on. And to be honest, Norman's was the smallest circulation, publication that I was involved in at that point in time. But it was important to Teeny for the merchandise table. So if you remember, guess what happened in 1980, less than a year after that letter? That's when Norm and his Pro Wrestling Enterprises started publishing My Championship Wrestling magazine, which was completely about the Tennessee territory and sold better than the Wrestling News because it was all of our guys that the fans were familiar with. And basically during that, because he was coming out with Rings Wrestling at that point that was on the newsstand, and I did some stuff for that also. It was just getting to be a lot of shit going on at the same time. So there was never any heat. It just that I was a fucking overstressed teenager.
Yeah, I mean, it comes across too, he doesn't want to really, he just wants to know what the problem is. He doesn't want to really get involved or talk to anyone directly about it.
No, even then, the same thing was true. If you don't hear from me, everything's fine. It's only if you hear from me, I will tell you if there's a problem. But yes, we got all together on that. So, and that's right. In 1980, I was doing stuff for the Gong magazine in Japan. I was doing all the pictures for the programs that were sold in the Tennessee territory. I was still sending stuff in to Norman for the Wrestling News and his new Ring Wrestling. Plus, we were starting to do the new Championship Wrestling magazine.
And he had taken over Wrestling Review by that point also.
And that's the thing, is they were constantly combining, and he had different, I've got a whole set of these things and I can't even put them in order because he has such a confusing numbering system and cover dates. But Gong Magazine programs, Bill Apter, London Publishing, and all of these multiple magazines that Norman was doing while I was doing all the gimmick table photos and ring announcing either 1 or 2 nights a week out of the 4 nights a week of matches that I was going to. So it was starting to take a while for me to get shit. But you know what? Back in those days, the goddamn printing deadline for the November issue was fucking July. It was like a 3-month turnaround to get anything printed back in those days, even Apter's magazines.
Or Stanley Weston's magazines, as they were also
Well,
called.
I never met Stanley. I understand he had gotten a lot of heat in the industry before Bill came in and smoothed it over with people.
Well, Jim, imagine back then on the road taking those photos. Imagine if you had some sort of mechanism to go and create a website before there were websites and sell these great photos to whoever wanted to purchase them.
That's exactly right. Imagine if I had been able, as a teenager, as industrious as I was, all the contacts I had, if I'd been able to have a platform, Brian, that would have sold these fine photographs and magazines and products all over the world, well, it would have been amazing, rather than just Kentucky, Tennessee, and parts of Tokyo. But folks, you can do this now. You can sell shit all over the world, or any place that has people in it, at least. I don't know about the Amazonian rainforest, but we're talking about our friends at Shopify, the commerce platform that's revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Folks, we've talked about it before. Whether you're one of these garbage entrepreneurs, wait a minute, that says garage. Whether you're one of these garage entrepreneurs, or
That's me. I'm a garbage entrepreneur.
That's right.
I bleed
He's
everywhere.
dope. He bleeds everywhere and then bottles it and sells it to his customers. Or if you're IPO ready, that means an international piss-off notice. Whatever you are, Shopify is the only tool that you need. See, Brian, you have a tool working on the show with you, but Shopify is the only tool that you need to start, run, and grow your business without the struggle. Now, for example, let's say you're selling government secrets to foreign powers. You want to get on the internet and have a nice-looking platform to do something like that.
Let's not say that. That is certainly not something legal to sell and not something we would want to encourage anyone to sell if they actually had these secrets.
Well, let's say you're selling satin sheets from Shopify's in-person POS system.
Let's do that.
Well, and right there, that point of satin system will sell your satin sheets with as much alliteration as possible. Or let's say you're offering organic olive oil on Shopify's all-in-one e-commerce platform. Whatever the case, Shopify has the internet's best converting checkout to help you turn these people from browsers to buyers, from tire kickers to contented customers. And Shopify powers 10% of all the e-commerce in the United States. The feather bottoms only have 7% in their whole market share. And Shopify is truly a global force powering Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen.
What the hell are you saying?
I don't know. It's on the copy here. They power Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size, shape, color, and origin across over 170 countries. Apparently, Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen are just tearing the business up in whatever business they're in, but Shopify made them. It wasn't due to their hard work. It was Shopify. Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. If you need help, you call them up and they're going to say, "We support you. Go out and work harder."
No, that's not what they're going to say. They're going to say, "We support you. What can we do to help you? And let's make this a wonderful experience for you and the customer."
Well, that's another way of looking at it. They're your no-excuses business partner. You can sell without needing to code or design. Just bring your ideas. Shopify helps you open up the shop. Now, let's say, for example, you want to sell, I don't know, possibly weapons-grade plutonium or black market.
No.
No?
I don't even know where you're going with the black market. You got me at weapons-grade plutonium. Let's not say you're going to buy that. Let's say you're going to actually avoid that. But maybe you want to buy some marbles.
Marble? I think you've lost yours. But let's say you want to buy any product that's in demand around the world. Or let's say you want to sell it. If you want to sell a product that's in demand around the world, last time I heard plutonium was highly prized, but I'll go with whatever you think.
We're not going with plutonium.
We're not going to sell any plutonium on Shopify, but Shopify will help you get paid. They'll make getting paid simple, because they instantly accept every type of payment. I guess that includes that Bitcoin and currency that some countries issue in exchange for weapons-grade plutonium, but they'll accept the payment.
Well, what you just said is probably true, but it has nothing to do with Shopify. That's how people use crypto in weird, dark places of the world.
Well, and speaking of dark places, you don't want a dark website. You want a bright one that looks attractive, gorgeous, flexible templates, and powerful tools to customize your online store. You're going to get that at Shopify. That way, if you want to sell a variety of illegal and illicit drugs, they're going to look good. You're going to have pretty colors on your
That's
LSD
absolutely
tablets.
not metaphorically
No?
speaking. These are metaphorical drugs that Jim is speaking of because that is highly illegal. Listen, you could sell legal, wonderful things, your own creations, to your own customers all around the world.
Create things, make things, and sell them. And they're in 170 countries, so you never know what's legal in Pakistan or Cambodia. But nevertheless.
Worry about what's legal in the country that you are coming from.
Well, I can understand where you're coming from, pal. Running a growing business means getting the insights you need wherever you are in all of those 170 countries with Shopify's single dashboard. You can manage orders, shipping, and payments from anywhere, all with one hand on the steering wheel. And folks, once again, all you got to do to start making the money, start selling your products, start becoming a big business typhoon. You got to sign up.
Tycoon.
Huh?
Tycoon.
Who's he?
Not typhoon.
I wasn't talking. I was talking about, who were you talking about? I'm talking about Shopify. You're talking about, who is Tycoon?
Well, you said typhoon.
Yeah, you want to be a big business typhoon. I don't know who Tycoon is.
Typhoon's the guy who fell through the walls as Shockmaster. Tycoon is what you want to be, someone making lots of money, controlling your interests.
You can be that. You can be who you want to be. Do what you want to do. Go where you want to go. With Shopify.com, sign up right now for a $1 per month trial period at Shopify.com/Cornette. Go to Shopify.com/Cornette to take your business to the next level today. It'll be up on a high level with me, just as high as I am. Shopify.com/JCE to make your money.